What's up, chess player? What was the greatest comeback in your chess history? Like, whether you have won the game being a queen down, or it was a checkmate for you and then you somehow turned it around, let me know in the comments, because today I want to share you the most incredible comeback probably out of my entire chess career, because it has been played in a classical chess on a pretty high level. My opponent was a 2100 rated player, and here in this position he had two connected extra passers in the rook's endgame, two extra pawns without any compensation whatsoever, and not only I saved this game, I have even won it in classical chess. So let me show you what happened here, because it's really 1 in a million times situation. So at this point of the game I was completely desperate, because before I had a completely winning position and I thought my opponent has no chances whatsoever, and then somehow I failed completely to convert my initiative into a full point. So I found myself in this incredibly miserable endgame, being 2 pawns down, in a situation where most of the other pro players would already resign and go to home. But I'm not that guy. I just pretty much never resign until I still have even one chance out of a million, and that is exactly what happened in this situation. So what I played was king to e7. I'm just trying to not allow my opponent to promote his pawn so easily, because the king can go forward as you lose a pawn and essentially even the rook. And well, the pawn can't also go, because first of all it's pinned, and even if it's not, the pawn is still hanging there on g5. So seemingly it's still not entirely simple for white to promote. So my opponent started to shuffle pieces around. I just stay there. Of course I have no choice whatsoever. I can just give a check, forcing the king down, trying to say, well, you can go forward. So rook b5, rook g3. Now I'm controlling this pawn, so the king once again can't go anywhere forward. My opponent gave me some checks, but it doesn't really change anything. And then he started to find a plan to fight for the victory, because obviously with two connected passers you always want to win the game. Rook g3, king to d2, he went all the way back here, and then rook to b6 and rook to f6. So you could see that now the king is cut off, those 2 pawns are free to go, but there is still one little problem. The pawn on g5 is hanging, so my opponent played king to f4, I gave him a check, king to e5, and I went back. So once again I'm attacking the pawn. Well, that's all I can do. And my opponent says, well, you won the pawn, you can get it, because I have 2 connected passers, it's more than enough for me, I'm gonna promote it into a queen. I said, well, I have no choice, let me take it and let's see what's gonna happen. Rook f7 check. Now was a very interesting moment for me where the king should go, because it seemed like king h6 avoids all of the checks in the future and the king is safer there, and well, I can concentrate on my pawn promotion. But on the other side the king is too offside, and I felt that if I go that way then it's so easy for my opponent to just promote, and my king is never gonna be able to somehow help stop those pawns. So I got back to g8, because well, somehow this rook is still not that well protected. I want to start chasing those pawns, so let's see what's gonna happen here. And of course there are millions of ways for white to win this game. My opponent played rook d7, which seems like an interesting move because it protects the pawns, and now the pawns are going forward. But the problem with this move is the rook is somehow passive here, because it's not able to get to the first rank very quickly when you need it to stop this pawn promotion. But maybe it doesn't matter, because, well, white's pawns are so much more dangerous. So I played rook g3, just trying to keep an eye on this pawn and at the same time be ready to push my pawn forward, because that's the only active asset that I have in my disposal, so I have to use it. King went to f6. Now it's very annoying for me, because some checks are coming, this pawn is coming. So I played g5. Once again, I don't really have any choice. e5, this pawn is going forward, and of course it seems to be very dangerous. But I played g4, and I'm ready to meet the move e6 with a check and then push my pawn forward. That was my plan, and yeah, let's see what happened here. So instead of the move e6, my opponent decided to give me a check. Remember I told you about this king, that I played king to g8 to have this opportunity maybe to help my rook to stop this e pawn or d pawn, whatever, whichever one will be coming. So my opponent is giving me a check now just to push me away and then promote the pawns. But unfortunately for him, he played here the move d4. And that is the first moment in the game where the evaluation of the position changes to equal. I mean, that's difficult to imagine, but now this pawn is dangerous enough to compensate being a pawn down, because remember, in the endgame, not the quantity of the pawns matters, but the quality. So how dangerous are they for the opponent, how close they are to promote. So the right move in this position was basically any other move. The move e6 is also not a good one, surprisingly enough, because once again, rook f3 check, and the pawn goes on. And the problem is, if you go to the g file, then this pawn always promotes with a check. But if you go to e5, then you always run into some checks over here. So e7, I have the time to give you a check, and then either you lose your pawn, or basically you allow your opponent to promote, which is also very bad. So e6 is not the right move. The right thing was here to go back here, to keep an eye on this pawn, to make this rook go away, because now it's a completely different story. The simplest way to do it is just to put your rook behind the pawns. Remember, in the rook's endgame, put your rook behind the pawn. It's the most active square, the most active thing the rook can do, because not only it stops the pawn, but it also doesn't allow your opponent's rook to be active, because the rook here has no moves, whereas you have the entire rank at your disposal. So what you need to do is just to go away with the king to avoid any checks, and then the position is completely winning for white. At some point you can even sacrifice the pawns, because those pawns will be unstoppable. So that is what my opponent should have done, but instead he played the move d4. I mean, he has connected passers, he wants to push it, it's very clear, but unfortunately chess is not that simple. And now after rook f3, it's already equal, but well, we were both in some kind of a time trouble. We get 30 seconds increment after each move, so it's not that dangerous, but still you have to make your moves. And I played g3, and now it's very scary for white, because suddenly this pawn is just 2 moves away from promotion with a check, so that basically feels unstoppable. And you also don't really have any way to get your rook into the g file. So there is only one move which still holds for white. So feel free to pause the video for a second and find the way to make a draw for white, because the obvious one to just get the rook finally to the first rank. You remember what I said about the rook being on d file. Now it doesn't have this opportunity to go there in one move, and that is what cost white the entire advantage. Because here, obviously, after rook a1, there is rook f1, and there is nothing stopping that pawn from being promoted. So the right way is rook to d7 check, king goes back, and now there is a beautiful move for white, which is maybe not that obvious, especially from a distance, especially when you're under pressure, when you're thinking, well, I'm completely winning, I have 2 connected passers and 2 extra pawns, and now all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation when you have to save your ass, because suddenly, well, your opponent is attacking and threatening to promote a pawn. So the right move is king to h6, and once you see it, it seems to be obvious. The idea is just to go rook g7 check and then stop the pawn, so g2 is never a move, but it's not winning for white, because meanwhile black is in time to take one of the pawns, let's say here, rook d3, you can protect it, but then g2, and yeah, the pawn is going to be lost, and of course that's a draw. But that was still a way for white to get this draw so easily. But my opponent played, instead of rook d7 check, he played here king to g4, which already leads us to an extremely interesting endgame where I get a queen promoted. And at this point I was very scared, because I thought, well, it can't be true. I mean, how on earth have I managed to do that and promote the queen, and now I am in the driver's seat after being just 2 pawns down without any compensation? So I was waiting for some kind of catch there. Maybe I have blundered a check and now my queen is going to be taken. But no, it's really a healthy queen, and those pawns are still far away from being promoted. So it's really only black who can win this game. But of course, according to the engine, you know, everything is always a draw. So rook d6, the pawn is protected by the the rook is protected by the pawn, and the rook is protecting the d4 pawn, so it seems like there is no way for black to win this game. But I immediately realized the pattern that might allow me to win this game, namely to get this king into a zugzwang. where the king, let's say, would be in the corner, my queen would be on f2, so it doesn't have any moves, and then the rook has to move. And once it moves, either it has to go away and leave the pawn unprotected, or it has to go away along the d file, and then the rook would be unprotected and I might be able to win it with those checks. So that is what I started to do, but then I realized that I'm not really comfortable having my king here because I always have some threats of those pawns going forward, and I don't want to miss that. So I wanted to relocate my king all the way to e7 so that no checks are possible and the king is keeping an eye on those pawns. So I gave a few checks. First, here I was very afraid not to blunder this rook f6 check and blunder my queen. So I played queen e2 first, queen f3, one more check, and then finally I played king f7. King e3, queen to c2, so nothing really changes, but I transpose my king into this e7 square, which was perfect for me. But the problem is the position is still a dead draw, according to the engine and according to the common sense, because there is no way for me to force the king into the corner if the king doesn't want to go into the corner. So I gave here the check, and at some point my opponent offered a draw, could be here, queen to d2, and now he essentially could have played king to d5. And then, even though I felt like this king is weirdly placed here, I wanted to play something like queen c2, and now the king has no moves to go, and I thought I might have some chances here. But the problem is, now this rook activates itself and gives some checks, then yeah, still not that simple. Rook f6 you can play, and then once again the king is in safety. So that should have been done, but my opponent probably didn't want to risk because, well, you don't know, your king has no moves. That might be scary, especially if you're in time trouble. I made here another check with queen to d3, and he played king to g2, which changes the entire evaluation of the position tremendously because now it's winning for black. Why? Because I played here queen to e3, and only at this point my opponent realized the idea that if the king continues to move, I just push it to the corner, and then we have our situation when the white rook has to move and white is losing. So that was a realization moment for my opponent. He still had a chance here if he would have played king to g4, but I don't know, for some reason he didn't want to go there. He just thought it's a draw no matter what. So yeah, he just wanted to show it to me. Because he offered me a draw, I continued to play, and he thought, well, are you nuts or something? Because this position is a dead draw, you can never do anything for me, the rook is protected, the pawn is protected, there is no chance in hell that you can do anything to me. But as I said, I knew that the pattern exists of me trying to make a Zugzwang for white. I just tried to find the way to make it possible, and my opponent helped me a little bit here, and then there is no chance for him. He continues, so he played the move d5. Another trick here, because obviously I cannot take the pawn. Now you could see the drawback of my king being here, but I have found a very interesting idea. First of all, I gave a check, because now if you go forward, then you might run into some troubles. So my opponent played king to g1. I still cannot take pawn, but I played a very interesting move. Feel free to pause the video for a second and find the best move for black here, because still you need to be tricky to win this game. Okay, I hope you have found it. I have played king to e8. I mean, it's not the only move that wins. King f8 is also fine, but that is an incredible move here, because now there is another Zugzwang for white. You don't have any moves. If the king moves, I can still go here and push you, make another move, and you cannot really push your pawn because the d6 rook is going to be not protected and I'm gonna win it. You can play rook to e6 check, but then I want to play king to d7. And now I no longer have this problem, I no longer have this problem, so once the rook is giving me a check, and just go to the side, and then I basically win the game because both of those pawns are not protected and I'm gonna win one of them, and if that happens, I'm gonna win the second one. So instead of all of that, my opponent played here king to h1, I played queen f2 and rook f6. So now once again, like I said, two pawns are unprotected, that means the queen is gonna take it, but I have to be careful once again not to take the e5 pawn because there is still this rook e6 idea. So I played queen h4 check, king g2, queen e4 check, attacking both of the pawns. My opponent went for king g3, which allows me to take the pawn on e5 with a check, and essentially it doesn't matter because no matter what, I was going to take both of the pawns. But here, my opponent actually resigned because he was so desperate. He thought that he is losing the rook. And after, I don't know, 6 hours of battle, he missed the simple fact that rook f4 is still possible for him. And then we are going to play for another 30 minutes because, as you may know, winning with the queen against the rook is not an easy task to achieve. Theoretically, that's a winning position, but it's a very, very tricky one once again. But for some reason, my opponent completely missed it. And I can fully understand that, because being 2 pawns up, having a completely winning position, and turn it out into such a miserable endgame, that happens really one time in a lifetime, more or less. So yeah, there are no words to express his feelings after this game. And for me, well, I felt like I need to buy a lottery ticket because, well, something like that doesn't happen every day and you have to use it. And that was a round number 1 of the very strong tournament. So it gave me this hope that, okay, I got lucky today, incredibly lucky, like you can ever be. And so now I have to use it. I don't need to spoil it. And I went on with the tournament. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what was the most incredible comeback that you had in your chess career. It's very interesting for me to know whether you feel that that is something incredible, because for me it never happened, but I really almost never resigned. I always looked for those chances, and sometimes you are being rewarded for that. So in this video you're gonna get another incredible useful thing to learn, because chess is a very complicated game and I do my best to make it simpler for you.